The same three projects we created in the previous lesson, except this time we're going to add CSS to make these projects look nice. Let's start by creating a copy of the project's HTML file from the previous lesson. We'll go to our code editor and click this icon to show our files. And then here, we're going to select 09-dom-projects. We're going to right click, copy, and down here, right click and paste. And let's rename this file by right-clicking, rename. At the end, we're going to remove copy. And at the beginning, we're going to change it to 10 and press enter. Now let's hide our files. And we're going to open 10 and press enter. So these are the same three projects we created in the previous lesson, except this time, we're going to add CSS to make these projects look nice. Let's start by creating a copy of the project's HTML file from the previous lesson. We'll go to our code editor and click this icon to show our files. And then here, we're going to select 09-dom-projects. We're going to right click, copy, and down here, right click and paste. And let's rename this file by right clicking, rename. At the end, we're going to remove copy. And at the beginning, we're going to change it to 10 and press enter. Now let's hide our files. And we're going to open 10 DOM projects in the browser by right-clicking, open with live server. Now we can close our previous tabs, as well as the previous code from lesson 9, which is this file and these two. And now we're ready to add CSS to our projects. We'll start with the YouTube subscribe button. Let's go to the tab for our project, and we're going to style this button first. So we reviewed CSS in lesson 4, and one of the ways we can write CSS code is using the style element. So inside the head section, we're going to create an element using less than, style, greater than. So the style element lets us write CSS code inside. So inside here, we're going to write button, open curly bracket, close curly bracket. So the code in front of the brackets is called the CSS selector. This tells the computer which elements we want to style or change the appearance. So button will style all button elements on the page. But in this situation, we only want to style the subscribe button because the calculate button will be styled differently. So to style a specific element, we can use the class attribute. So if we look at our button, currently it already has a class of JS subscribe button, but this class is being used by our JavaScript. A good practice is to add a different class that would be used by CSS. So an element can have multiple classes. We just separate them with a space. So inside this class attribute, we're going to type space and add another class, subscribe-button. Now this element has two classes, and we're going to use this second class in our CSS. So to style a specific class, we're going to remove button, and we're going to type a dot. So starting with a dot means we're going to style a class rather than an element name. So we'll style the class subscribe-button, which is this button right here. And now inside these curly brackets, we're going to tell the computer how to style this button. For example, border, none, and semicolon. If we save, this will remove the border from the button. So it no longer has a border like this button. So that's how we style a specific element with CSS. We add a class to the element, and then inside CSS, we start with a dot and the class. And between the curly brackets, the code on the left is called the property. This tells the computer what we want to change. On the right is called the value. This tells the computer what we want to change the property to. We separate the property and value with a colon, and we end the whole thing with a semicolon. So this is also called a property-value pair. As a reminder, this is just a review of CSS. If you want to learn CSS in more detail, you can check out my HTML and CSS full course in the video description. So we just added one style to this button. We're going to add more styles so that it looks like our final design. To make this easier, I'm going to rearrange my windows, and I'm going to put the final design at the bottom and then our project at the top. This will make it easier to compare the two designs. Next, to make it look like the final design, we're going to style our element one by one. Let's go back to our code and press enter. And next, let's change the background color to black. To do that, we'll type background-color, black, and semicolon, and save. Now our button has a black background. Let's keep going one by one. We'll change the text color to white next. So in our code, we'll type color, white, and semicolon, and save. Now, if you're wondering how I know all these properties, you can usually find them by searching in Google. Just make sure you search for what you are trying to do. Let's keep going one by one. The next thing we'll change is we're going to add spacing on the inside of the button. In CSS, space on the inside of an element is called padding. So we'll create a new line, and we'll use the property padding-top, 10px, and save. So this will add space on the inside of the element called padding at the top of 10px. So the px here means pixels. A pixel is a unit of measurement in computers. Your screen is made up of many small little squares. Each of these squares is called a pixel. So a pixel is the smallest thing that you can have on your screen. Screen sizes are measured in pixels. Images and video sizes are also measured in pixels. And don't worry, the more you work with pixels, the more you'll get used to how big a pixel is. So in this example, 10 pixels is equal to this amount of space, and it looks pretty close to the final design. So let's keep going. We'll add space on the inside of the element at the bottom this time. So we'll create a new line and type padding-bottom, 10px again, and save. And that adds space at the bottom of the element of 10 pixels. Next, let's increase the space on the left and the right. We'll go into our code and add padding-left, 10 pixels, and padding a little more space. And now the spacing looks close enough to the final design. So in CSS, it's normal to do some trial and error to get the styling right. Let's keep styling this one by one. Next, we'll make the text thicker, or bold. So let's go into our code, and to change the thickness of the text, we'll use the property font-weight, bold. Let's save, and that will make our text bold. So we're almost there. Now let's make the corners rounded, like in the final design. We'll go back to our CSS, and the property for making the corners round is called border-corner. radius, and we'll make it :5 pixels. Let's save, and you can see that it made our corners round. So the pixels here tells the computer how round we want the corners to be. The higher the pixels, the more round it will get. So if we change this to 10 pixels and save, it will make the corners even more round. So let's change this to something really big to make it completely round. We'll change this to 50 pixels and save. And now our button is completely round. The last style we're going to add is in the final design. If we put our mouse over the button, it turns into this hand icon. So we call this a pointer. And we're going to do the same thing in our project. So let's go to our code. And to create that pointer icon, we're going to use the property cursor: pointer. And let's save and put our mouse over the button. And you'll notice it turns into this hand pointer icon. And that's it. Now our subscribe button looks like the final design. Next, let's click the subscribe button. You'll notice that it only changes the text. But if we click the final design, it also changes the background color and the text color. So we're going to learn how to change the CSS when we click a button. Let's go back to our code, and this time we're going to scroll down to our JavaScript, which is here. So we learned in the previous lesson, we can get HTML elements from the page and put them inside our JavaScript. And we also learned that these HTML elements are just JavaScript objects, and they can have properties like inner text and inner HTML. Every element has another property we can use called class list. Class list gives us control of the class attribute. So one solution we can do is when we click the button, we can add a class, and then this class will have different styles. So let's see how we do that in our code. We'll scroll down to the subscribe function, and when we click the button and make the button subscribed, we're also going to add a class. So let's create a new line, and we'll type button element dot class L list. So class list itself is an object, which means it has properties and methods we can use. One method is called .add, which adds a class to an element. So after this, let's type .add and brackets. And now inside these brackets, we're going to put a string. So this string is the class that we want to add when we click this button. Let's add a class called is-subscribed and save. So now every time we click this button, it will add a class to the button called is-subscribed. Let's give it a try. First, we'll right-click on the page and then click Inspect, and we'll go to the Elements tab. And I'll rearrange my windows so you can see it. And then inside the HTML, pay attention to the class of the button. Now when we click the button, it's going to add an extra class called is-subscribed. So that's what this line of code does. And now that this button has the is-subscribed class, we can style it in our CSS. So let's go back to our code, and we'll scroll up to our CSS. And here, we'll type dot to style a class, and we'll style the class is-subscribed. Is-subscribed. And curly brackets. And now inside these curly brackets, let's change the background color to gray and the text color to black. Background dash color colon gray, and then color colon black. And make sure to type these styles below the subscribe button styles so that these styles will override the styles above. Now if we save and then click our button, it will add the is-subscribed class, and now this button will get our new styles that we added here. So that's one way to change the CSS when we click a button. All right, now I'm gonna move this back to the top. And notice that our background color is different from the final design. The final design uses a much lighter gray. So how do we get this exact color? To do that, we're gonna open the Elements tab again. So on this page, we're going to right-click, click Inspect, and then click the Elements tab. And I'll rearrange my windows so we can see it. So in this section, in the Style section, we can see the CSS that the element has. So first, let's actually find this button, which is right here, and we'll click it. And here. So on this page, we're going to right click. We're going to open a lighter gray. So how do we get this exact element has? So first, let's actually find this. So let's make a copy of this color and put it into our code. Right click, copy, and here we'll remove it and right click and paste. Now let's save and go back to our project and try it out. And now we get the exact same color as the final design. So by the way, this color is known as an RGB value. RGB means red, green, and blue. And computers can create any color using a combination of red, green, and blue. So the first number here is how much red we want in our color. The second number is how much green we want. And the third number is how much blue we want. Each number goes from 0 to 255. 0 means less color and darker. 255 means...
Can you hear me? Oi. Can you hear me, matey? Matey. Oh. Okay. I'm gonna continue.
means more color and lighter. So this color here uses 240 for all of the colors. So it's close to 255 and will give us a very light gray color that you see here. Next, if we go back to the final design and we click our button again, it will change back to the original style. So we're going to create this feature in our project as well. So one way to do this is when we click the button again, we can remove this class. So let's scroll down to the bottom to the subscribe function. And when we click the button and we change it back to subscribe, we can remove this class. To do that, class list has another method we can use called remove. So let's create a new line and we'll type button element dot class capital L list dot remove and brackets. So this does the opposite of dot add. It will remove a class from this element. So inside the brackets, we'll type a string and the class we want to remove, which is is-subscribed, and save. Now let's try out our project. We'll click the button. It will get the class is subscribed and get the extra styles. And now when we click the button again, it will remove the class and it will remove the extra styles. So notice here that when we add a class, we just type the class name. We don't type a dot and the class name like we did for query selector. Typing a dot only makes sense in query selector. Next, we're going to style the text on the page. Let's scroll up to our CSS, and one thing we can do is to style all the paragraph elements on the page using this code, p and curly brackets. However, we're going to use a better solution. Instead of styling all the paragraphs, we're just going to style the body element. When we change the text in the body element, it will change the text in the entire page. So inside these curly brackets, let's change the text here. So we're going to use a different style of text. This is called a font. To change the font, we're going to use this property, font-family, colon, and we'll change it to Arial, which is what I used in the final design. So let's save, and this will style all the text inside the body and change the font to Arial. And a good practice is to write any styles for the body at the top. So if we need to, we can override it later. So let's move these to the top. We'll right click, cut, and then up here, create some new lines, and right click and paste. And we're gonna add one more style before moving on. Let's add some space between the subscribe button and the second project. So earlier, we learned that space on the inside of an element is called padding. Space on the outside of an element is called margin. So inside our subscribe button, at the bottom, let's add a property called margin dash bottom colon 30 pixels and save. So this will add space on the outside of the element at the bottom of 30 pixels. Now let's move on and style the Amazon shipping calculator with CSS. Again, we'll add a class to these elements and then style them in our CSS. Let's scroll down to the text box, which is the input element, and we're going to add another class by typing space, and let's use the class cost-input. And now we're going to style this in CSS. So let's scroll up, and here we'll style the class using .cost-input and curly brackets. And inside, we'll style this one by one. Let's look at our final design and see what styles we need. So first, let's change the text size because our text is a little smaller than the text here. So to change the text size, we're going to use font-size, colon, and let's try 15 pixels, and save. And now our text looks close enough to the final design. Next, let's add some space inside the text box. So remember, space inside an element is called padding. So we're going to type padding dash top of 10 pixels, padding dash bottom also 10 pixels, and let's add padding to the left 10 pixels and padding dash right of 10 pixels. So this will add a space on the inside of our text box in every direction. If we save, now it looks just like the final design. Now I'm going to show you a shortcut for padding that will save us some typing. So if we create a new line, we can actually use a property called padding and colon, and then type 10 pixels. This padding property lets us add padding on multiple sides at once. If we type one value here, like 10 pixels, it will add 10 pixels to every side. So this line does the same thing as these 4 lines above. So let's actually comment this out using /* and star.
Oh yeah, I forgot. I wanted to see how live it is, like how much lag is there. So I'm gonna wave my hands, and the moment I wave my hand, just like text me on WhatsApp because that's like instant. Okay? So I'm gonna wave it in 3, 2, 1. Just text me now. Oh shit. You just texted me saying the net went.
/ and save. And you can see that this one line of CSS did the same thing as the other 4 lines of CSS. So this shortcut can save us some typing. Next, let's move on and style the calculate button. Again, we'll add a class to this button so we can style it. So in this button, let's add a class attribute. Class equals calculate dash button. Now let's style this in our CSS by scrolling up. And here we'll type dot calculate dash button and curly brackets. And inside these curly brackets, we're going to style this button one by one. So let's start with the background color. So we'll type background dash color colon green and semicolon and save. Next, so
let's come here, button. Is you want to make it look like that, right? So you want to do background colors line. Border. Okay, so it's and then we have the color is white, and then we have some padding. And let's have some pixels padding. Oh my god. Oh, so it's definitely green. Yeah, we need some more padding.
type background dash color colon green and semicolon
Yeah, you can hear me, right?
and save. Next, let's change the text color to white. So we'll type color colon white and save again. Okay, let's keep going and we'll remove the border around this button. So we'll type border colon none, save. Next, let's make our text a little bigger, like in the final design. So we'll type font dash size and make it 15 pixels and save. Okay, so now let's add the space on the inside of the button. So we're gonna use this shortcut again. We'll type the padding property, colon, and this time we're gonna give it two values separated by spaces, 10 pixels and maybe 50 pixels. So it's easier to see.
Okay, wait, so I was saying I'm gonna wave my hand, and as soon as you see me waving my hand, text me so that I know how live it is. Okay? 3, 2, 1. Text me. Okay, I think your signal is just really bad. Anyway.
What this does. So when we give two values to padding, the first value is the vertical padding, so the top and bottom. The second value is the horizontal padding, or left and right. If we save, so you can see that the left and right has a lot of padding, which is 50 pixels. So now let's make this match our final design. So instead of 50 pixels, let's bring it down to 15 pixels and save. Okay, so that looks pretty close. Let's also increase the padding on the top and bottom so that the text box and the button line up with each other, like in the final project. So let's change the vertical padding to maybe 12 pixels and save. The last thing we'll style for this project is when we put our mouse over the button, it turns into the pointer icon. So to create this, we're going to use the property cursor : pointer and save and give it a try. And that's it. We just finished styling the Amazon shipping calculator. So now let's give this a try. We'll type 25 in the text box and press calculate. And at the bottom, it will add $10 of shipping and show $35. Finally, we're going to style the last project in this lesson, which is the rock, paper, scissors project. And this will finish the project. Let's go back to supersimple.dev and we'll scroll down on this page and then click this link to show the final design for rock, paper, scissors. So I'll rearrange my windows so we can see this. And we're going to change the buttons to these nice big icons for each of the moves. And when we click a move, it will show the result in bold and show an icon of the move that we picked and the move that the computer picked. So we're going to make this project look really nice. Now let's get started. I'm going to rearrange my windows back so we have it at the bottom. And let's create a copy of the rock, paper, scissors project for this lesson. We'll go to our code editor and click here to show our files. And we're going to make a copy of 09. Nine here by styling the body. We want to make the background color of the entire page this dark gray color. We'll go into our code and let's create a style element so we can write some CSS. Inside the head, let's type less than style greater than, and then inside here, we're going to style the body. So we'll type body and curly brackets. Now inside here, we're going to change the background color. So background dash color colon, and we're going to get the color that we see here by right-clicking, click Inspect, and then go to the Elements tab, and I'll rearrange it so we can see it. And then here, we'll find the body element and click it, and in this Style section, we can find the background color that we need. So let's select this, and right-click, copy, and in here, right-click, and paste. And a semicolon at the end. Let's save, and I'll move this back to the corner. And now our project has the same background color as the final design. Next, let's make the text color white. So in our CSS, we'll use the color property, and colon white, and semicolon, and save, and that will make our text white. Next, let's change the style or the font of this text. We'll type font dash family colon Arial, which is what the final design uses, and save. All right, now let's style these elements one by one to match the final design. We'll start with this paragraph at the top. So inside the paragraph element, let's add a class so we can style it in CSS. We'll add class equals, let's call this the title, and then in our CSS, we can style this class by starting with a dot and then title and curly brackets. So let's make our title really big, like the final design. We'll change the font dash size colon 30 pixels and save. So that looks close enough. Next, let's make the text bold. In our CSS, we'll use font dash weight colon bold. and save. Now let's move on to styling the buttons. So first, we're going to need these images in our project, and I'll show you how to get them. We'll put our mouse over the rock image, and we'll right-click, and we'll click Save Image. And now we're going to find the folder that contains all of our code. So for me, it's on the desktop, and it's this folder right here. So I'll double-click this folder, and then leave the file name as the default, rock-emoji, and click Save. And now in our code editor, if we click here, we should be able to see the rock image. Let's do the same with the paper and scissors image. Websites. At the beginning, we're gonna set a review of CSS. If you want to learn CSS, and colon, give it a try, calculate, bold dot. And we're going to change the buttons. So I'll rearrange my windows so we can see this. And it will show that the computer, I'm going to rearrange my windows back so we have it at the bottom. And let's create a copy of the rock, paper, scissors project for this lesson. We'll go to our code editor, 09 by 1 to match the final design. We'll start with this paragraph at the top. So inside the paragraph element, we'll put our mouse over the rock image, and we'll right-click with the paper image. And finally, right-click Save Image, and we'll save the scissors image. All right, now that we have these images using element. The image element is the image type less than the button. We're going to add an image element. So let's type less than img and greater than. So this is the image HTML element. It loads an image onto the page. The image element doesn't require a closing tag. This is called a void element. Now to load an image, we're going to add an attribute to this element called src. So src stands for source. It tells the computer which file or image to load. So let's look in our project. For this button, we're going to load rock-emoji.png. Inside the source attribute, we'll type rock-emoji.png. So what this does is it will look for the file with this name beside the HTML file, and it finds it right here, and it will load it onto the page. If we save, now inside our button, it loaded the rock image. Right now, this image is too big, so let's use CSS to decrease the size of this image. We'll hide the files, and let's give a class attribute to the image element so we can style it. So we'll type class equals, and let's call this a move-icon. And I'm also just going to add some new lines to make the code a little easier to read. So we'll scroll up to the CSS, and we're going to style this class using .move-icon and curly brackets. And let's decrease the height of this image. We can use the property height colon and a pixel value, 50 pixels, and save. So this will make the height of this image 50 pixels, and it will also resize the width automatically so that the image keeps its shape. So this size looks pretty close to the final design, so we can move on. Another feature of the source attribute is that we can put our files into folders. So let's open the files by clicking here. And let's say that we want to organize all of our images into a folder. So we're going to create a folder by clicking this icon. And let's name this folder Images. And we're going to drag these images into this folder. And drag this in here and in here. Now, unfortunately, you can see that the image doesn't load anymore. And that's because if we look at our code, source tells the computer to look for this file beside this HTML file. And right now, there is no file called rock-emoji.png because we put it in a folder. So to tell the computer to look inside this folder, we're going to type the folder name at the start, which is images. And then we're going to type a slash to go into the images folder and then look for this file, which is right here. If we save, the computer is now able to find this image and load it onto the web page. So this feature is called file paths. We can tell the computer to look for a folder beside the HTML file, like images, and then use a slash.
This isn't getting referenced. JS basics. So if I do, let's JS basics 6/log.
To tell it to go into the folder and look for a file. Now let's use this code to load the other images. You can do that. So, can I do that? Yeah, that works. Yep. Cool. So that should be onto our page.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's just retype it. So the dot images. Get the shock. Let me get all of it. Let's look at this.
So for the paper and attribute images folder, apply, move the scissors, resize the image we need. CS for the third button. Class equals move dash class using. So we'll use background dash color colon, and we'll use a special value called
Goofed up.
transparent color and class. And let's add a class to these buttons so we can style them with CSS. So we'll add class equals, and let's use move dash button.
Oops, not this. This should be this.
And for this button, we'll add the same class, class equals move dash button, as well as for the third button, class equals move dash button. Now let's scroll up to our CSS, and we're going to style this class using dot move dash button and curly brackets. So first, let's change the background color to match the background color of the page. So we'll use background dash color colon, and we'll use a special value called transparent. And this will make the button see-through. If we save, now these buttons are see-through. Next, let's add this white border to our buttons. So we use the border property, colon, and we're gonna give it 3 values. The first value is our border width, or how thick the border is. Let's use 1 pixel for now. The second value is the border style, and we'll use solid because it's a solid border. Other values we can use here are dotted or dashed. And the third value is the border color. So we're going to use white and semicolon at the end and save. And that will add a border. So let's make our border a little thicker like the final design. And that will add first value, which is the border width, to 3 pixels and save. Okay, so that looks pretty close. Now let's change the size of our buttons. Usually we use the padding to add space on the inside of an element, but in this case, our images have different sizes. So we're going to use width and height to set an exact size. So in our CSS, we'll type width, colon, and let's make it 100 pixels, and height, and also 100 pixels, and save. So it looks like our final design is a little bigger than what we have here. So let's increase the width and the height. So let's try 120 pixels and save. All right, so that looks pretty close. Now let's make these buttons round. And the property for that is called border-radius, colon. And to know how much we need to make it round, we can set it to half of the width or the height. So we'll set it to 60 pixels and save. Okay, so it's coming along really well. And lastly, we're gonna add some space between the buttons. So remember that space outside of an element is called margin. So let's add some margin on the right. So we'll type margin dash right, colon, and maybe 10 pixels, and save. And finally, when we put our mouse over the button, it turns into a pointer. So the property for that is cursor, colon, pointer, and save. And now our buttons match the final design. So let's keep moving and style the next part of the project, which is the result and the moves. If you don't see this here, you can just play the game, and it'll give us a new result. So to make this easier to style, we're going to go into our code. We're going to find the result, which is here, and we're going to add some fake results, like you win. Let's save. And now we have this result, and we're going to style it. So let's give this a class of result. And then in our CSS, we're going to style the class dot result and curly brackets. So let's make the text bigger. We're going to use font dash size, colon, and maybe 25 pixels, and save. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's make the text bold. So we use font dash weight, colon, bold, and save. And finally, we're going to add extra spaces between this and the buttons. So we'll add margin dash top and maybe 50 pixels and save. Okay, so I think that looks close enough. Now let's style the moves. And again, we'll scroll down and we're going to add some fake moves in here so it's easier to style. So we'll type u and then an image. So let's use the less than image and the source attribute. And let's just load the rock image and the scissors image for the computer. So to load the rock image, we'll look inside the images folder, slash to go into the folder, and then rock-emoji.png. So rock-emoji.png and greater than. And we'll add another image, less than image source equals images slash the scissors emoji, scissors dash emoji dot png and greater than, and finally the text computer. Let's save, and this will create some results, although the images are really big. So we can use the class move icon to resize them to be the same size as the buttons. So for both of these images, let's add the class move dash icon. And here as well, class equals move dash icon, and save. And now our images look good. Next, let's style this score section. So the only thing we need here is to add spaces between these two. So in this score element, let's add a class of score, and we'll scroll up and style this element using dot score brackets, and let's add some margin at the top. So margin dash top colon 50 pixels, and save. And let's compare it. And it looks like our final design has a little more spacing than this. So let's change this to 60 pixels and save. And that looks close enough. And finally, we'll style the reset score button. So let's go back to our HTML. We'll add a class to this button. So here, class equals reset dash score dash button. At the top, we'll type dot reset dash score dash button, curly brackets, and we'll make the background color white. So background dash color colon white. And let's also remove the border from our button using border colon none. Let's save and see how it looks. And then let's increase the size of this text because the final design looks a little bigger. So we'll add font dash size colon 15 pixels and save. Now let's add some extra space on the inside of the button. So that's padding colon, and we'll give it two values. The first value is the vertical padding. Let's use 10 pixels. And the second value is the horizontal padding. So let's use 15 pixels and save. And it looks like our final project is a little shorter than our button. So let's change the vertical padding to maybe 8 and save. And the last step is to add the cursor pointer. So here, cursor colon pointer and save. And that's pretty much it. We finished styling our rock, paper, scissors project. So now I'm gonna rearrange my windows so we can see the entire design, and it looks really nice. The last step here is to remove these fake results and use JavaScript to insert these results instead. So let's scroll down and we'll remove this result. And let's actually copy this code because we want our JavaScript to generate this code. So we'll right click and copy. And let's scroll to the bottom to where we insert the moves onto the page, which is here. And instead of this text, we're going to right click and paste the code that we had before. And this time, instead of picking rock every time, we're going to substitute this with the player move. So we'll remove this, and because this is already a template string, we can insert a value directly inside using $ and curly brackets, and we'll insert the player move. Let's also insert the computer's move in here. So we'll remove this and insert a value using $ and curly brackets, and we'll insert computer move. And now that we're inserting this with JavaScript, we can scroll up and remove the faked result, which is here. So we can select it and delete it. Now let's save. And we're not going to have anything in our results. And when we click a move, it will show us the result and also show us the moves that we picked. And that's it. We finished the rock, paper, scissors project. The last thing we're going to learn in this lesson is how to organize our code into different files. So notice that right now, all of our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is in one HTML file. And this makes the code harder to read because the file is bigger and it mixes 3 different languages. To make our code more organized and easier to read, we're going to separate each language into its own file. So let's scroll down and we'll start by separating our JavaScript into its own file. We'll click here to show our files and then click this icon to create a new file. And we'll name this file 10- rock-paper-scissors.js and press enter. So when we end a file with .js, it tells the computer that this file contains JavaScript code, not just text. Now let's go back to our HTML file, and we're going to move all of this code into the JavaScript file. So we'll select this code, and then we'll right-click and copy. And inside the JavaScript file, we'll right-click and paste. Now let's save, and we'll go back to the HTML file, and we can delete all this JavaScript code. And now we're just going to load our JavaScript file onto the web page. To do that, we can use an attribute of the script element called src, or source. So we'll make it equal, and this does the same thing as the image element. It tells the computer which file to load. If we type 10-rock-paper-scissors.js, this will look for a file called 10rockpaperscissors.js beside our HTML file, which is this file here, and it will run all the JavaScript inside this file. So it does the same thing as before, except now our JavaScript code is in its own file. And this makes our code cleaner because each file only contains one language, and each file also contains less code. Now let's go back to the HTML file and save, and you'll notice that our project works the same way as before. We just organized our code better. Another feature of the source attribute is that it also uses file paths. So we can put this JavaScript file in a folder, and we'll be able to find it. For example, let's show our files, and let's create a new folder by clicking this file, and then it here is, and then load ours onto the page from top to bottom. Next, we're going to learn how to separate our C, and let's create a new folder, and we'll call this folder styles, and press enter. So this folder will contain all of our CSS code. Let's click the folder, and we'll create a new file by clicking this icon, and let's name this file 10-
I think there's some delay on the screen. So
scissors
just text me.
CSS
Text
and
me.
press enter. So ending the file with .css